Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of ForgottenJareds.com. I'm your host, Jared AF, and I'm here in Mommy's basement taking a close look at some fine sporting arms like the Hammerli 208. Now the Hammerli 208 actually gets its start going all the way back to the 1920s and 1930s with the Walther Olympia pistols. These were pistols designed by Walther to essentially, as their name would imply, be very high-end target pistols that were intended to be shot at the Olympic Games in the various disciplines as well as all other manner of international shooting sports. These pistols would be offered in different variants such as the standard configuration or the sport model. There would be a hunter version that had a little bit lower profile sights, was intended to be more carried in a holster out in the woods, kind of like a Colt Woodsman. There was also a version intended for rapid fire that was chambered in 22 short. In any case, Walther during World War II would have its factory destroyed, and the town where the factory was originally established would end up in the Soviet occupation zone. So it wouldn't be until the 1950s, the early 1950s, that Walther would reestablish itself in Ulm, where it still resides today. And during the 1950s, Walther would partner with a company called Hammerli in Switzerland to produce more of these Walther Olympia pistols, and they would be known as the Hammerli Walther Olympia pistols, and these were the models 200 to 205. In the 1970s, Hammerli would take this Walther Olympia design and they would improve on it further and produce what Hammerli would call the Hammerli International series, starting with the model 206. This would be very similar to the later 208, but it's important because it's the first Hammerli model where you start to see a very distinct feature of these Hammerli pistols from this era, which is that the rear sight is actually attached to the frame and extends over the slide rather than being dovetailed directly into the slide. So you had the Hammerli 206, and eventually they would develop the Hammerli 208, which is this pistol right here and the subject of the video. Essentially, this is a standard pistol with orthopedic grips, with a 6-inch barrel chambered in 22 long rifle. And much like those earlier pistols, they also had different variants depending on the application that you were looking for. They also sold the model 211, which was exactly the same pistol as this, but instead of coming with these handed orthopedic grips, they came with smaller standard grips. You also had the Hammerli 210, which was a model set up for rapid fire that was chambered in 22 short and had a big heavy compensator on the front of it. Then there was also the model 212, which was sort of the Huntsman model, and it featured a slightly shorter barrel and it had a fully adjustable rear sight. However, that rear sight was dovetailed directly into the slide rather than being attached to the frame like the other Hammerli pistols of this generation. Now, all of these pistols operate on a very simple blowback system. They are chambered in 22 long rifle, so the barrel is actually fixed in place and the slide is the only part that reciprocates. Of course, one of the most prominent features of any of these Olympic style pistols are going to be these orthopedic grips. And yes, they are called orthopedic grips, not ergonomic grips like someone tried to correct me on. They're called that because they're designed to take some of the weight of the pistol and transfer that into your bone structure of your hand rather than relying solely on your grip and your grip strength to hold the gun up over long periods of time. The rear sight is fully adjustable for both windage and elevation, and as mentioned earlier, it is actually attached to the frame. The front sight is an undercut target style. These pistols would come with a barrel weight, and various different barrel weights were actually shipped with these models. This was probably the most common and standard barrel weight here. There are also barrel weights that have the same profile but are actually thicker. There are barrel weights that extended further down and towards the trigger guard, and some that extended even further down and came basically flush with the bottom of the trigger guard. Essentially, the point of these barrel weights, much like the grips, is to customize them to what the user wants in terms of feel and balance when shooting this pistol. It also had the secondary effect of helping to dampen any sort of natural barrel harmonics that you would expect to have with any firearm. The triggers on these Hammerli 208s are single stage triggers that can be set for either 1,000 grams or 1,360 grams. They also have the ability to be adjusted for over travel. The magazine release for the Hammerli 208 is actually a heel release, and that is very typical for European target pistols and especially target pistols of this era. The magazines are made of steel with a plastic base plate. They have a little tab that you can use to facilitate easier loading, and they hold 8 shots in the magazine. The magazine also allows the pistol to lock open on an empty magazine when you fire your last shot. The original Hammerli 208s had no furnishings for a safety, but later models that were produced would eventually adopt a safety. Now, pretty much every Hammerli 208 is going to look very similar to this with the polished flats and the matte top and slide. Really, I think it's a beautiful combination, and to me, this is exactly what a target pistol should look like. Field stripping of this firearm is very simple. You are going to need 2 tools. You're going to need a 4mm Allen key and a flat-headed screwdriver. First thing we're going to do is remove the magazine and ensure that the weapon is clear. at which point we can take our flat-headed screwdriver and remove the rear sight assembly. The rear sight assembly is just held in with a single screw. The next thing we're going to do is take our 4mm Allen key and unscrew the barrel weight, at which point we can remove the barrel weight from the front of the gun. Now, to take the slide off, it's a little bit easier if you're right-handed. We're going to pull the trigger guard down, which is a very Walther design, and then we're going to pinch it in place with our index finger, at which point we can take the slide and pull it to the rear, lift it up, and then let it come forward, and then we can take the slide completely off the gun. Now the gun is fully field stripped. This is as far as you need to take it down for any sort of routine maintenance and cleaning. And here with the gun field stripped, you can actually see the internal hammer mechanism. These guns are hammer fired, they are not striker fired. Now, one of the problems these Hammerli 208s would encounter over time when shot a lot is they would actually crack right here under the ejector. And unfortunately, I have shot this model enough to develop a crack here. Now, because of how this crack formed going into the corner where the recoil spring sits, this shouldn't propagate any further. And in my experience with this model, it hasn't had any effect on its accuracy or reliability. However, it is something that should be known. Reassembly is accomplished in the exact same way as disassembly. You make sure to pull down the trigger guard, pinch it with your index finger, put the slide on, pull it back, and then put it on the rails, at which point you can let the trigger guard go up, and it's now locked the slide in place. At which point we can reattach the barrel weight, which just slides into a dovetail. We take our 4mm Allen key and tighten that on. Then we can go ahead and slide the rear sight onto its rails and use our screwdriver to screw in the rear sight. And in my experience with thousands of rounds through this gun, removing and replacing the rear sight does in fact hold zero. That might not be the case for every Hammerli, but it is the case for mine. Now, unfortunately, the Hammerli 208 kind of came in at the tail end of the 70s and wouldn't see too much success at the Olympic Games. By this point, moving into the 1980s, most of the rapid fire competitors were using more modern designs that had more advanced systems of recoil mitigation. They were also switching to pistols that had forward-mounted magazines that allowed the grips to have less aggressive of a rake, which put the barrel more in line with your forearm, which further reduced the recoil. Now, where you would see the Hammerli 208 or the Hammerli International in the Olympic Games would be in the 25-meter sport pistol discipline. You definitely would not see the Hammerli 208 or Hammerli International in the 50-meter pistol discipline. Those guns were extremely specialized for the 50-meter free pistol discipline. Where the Hammerli excelled was in the international shooting sport of 25-meter standard pistol. 25-meter standard pistol is very similar to North American bullseye, where it's set up with 20 shots of slow fire. Then you move to a timed fire and a rapid fire portion. So 40 of your shots are actually shot under a time limit. 20 of your shots are shot slow fire for absolute precision. And the target that's used for the 25-meter standard pistol discipline is the exact same target as the 50-meter pistol discipline, but with that added time limit for 40 of the shots, and the fact that you have a gun with a much shorter sight radius than those 50-meter pistols and a much heavier trigger than those 50-meter free pistols, it created a very difficult sport. The highest value scoring ring on a 25-meter/50-meter pistol target is 50 millimeters, so just under 2 inches. And this pistol performed so well in that sport that the world record is actually held by a Hammerli 208. It was set by an American shooter named Eric Bullion, and he shot a score of 584 out of 600 points. If you want an idea of how difficult this sport is, go ahead and set up your shot timer for a random start. Start with your gun down at a 45-degree angle, and when it beeps, give yourself 10 seconds to shoot a 2-inch group at 25 meters or 27 yards. Now, the Hammerli 208, like any successful design, ended up being made for quite a few years. It was made from the 1970s well into the 1990s and was even upgraded into a model known as the 208S. And there was also sort of a economized version known as the 215 that was produced. These pistols would eventually be discontinued in, I believe, the late 90s or the early 2000s. However, they did kind of set the mold for the future Hammerli pistols, which were the XSA and the SIG Trailside. Now, those guns did not have the really cool frame-mounted rear sight. They did have dovetail rear sights, but they followed the same overall pattern as the Hammerli 208. They just had a few modern features, like, for example, a thumb magazine release rather than a heel magazine release. Today, the Hammerli XSA recently was discontinued and is now being sold by Walther under the CSP branding, or the Classic Sport Pistol branding, and it still follows the same pattern as the Hammerli 208 and the older Walther Olympia pistols. Now, despite these Hammerli 208s being almost 40, 50 years old by this point, they're still still extremely popular in North American bullseye shooting, and not just with civilians, but also even the Army Marksmanship Unit. I think most of their shooters use a Hammerli, and recently I saw a Hammerli 208 be used to shoot an amazing score. It was shot by a gentleman named John Shue, and he's probably one of the last remaining gunsmiths in America that knows how to work on these pistols. He shot an 895 out of 900, which means he put 90 shots at 50 and 25 yards into an area about this big. Also, despite their age, there does seem to be a pretty decent aftermarket support for the Hammerli 208s. There are all manner of different barrel weights you can get. You can even get adapters that mount a Picatinny rail onto the front of this. There are also several different types of red dot mounts, such as this one that attaches in lieu of the barrel weight. There's also some that replace the entire rear sight. Grips for these handguns are also readily available in all different kinds of configurations, such as orthopedic style like this, also standard ambidextrous styles. There's also grip adapters that actually mimic the grip shape of a 1911. So despite this gun not exactly achieving great success in the Olympic Games, this gun is very much so a fantastic target pistol. It's a classic target pistol, and it sees great success in other international sports. It has seen success at the Olympic Games of years past in the discipline of 25 meter sport pistol, and it still sees great success in the North American bullseye scene to this day. If you like this kind of content, I have a whole series of videos talking about Olympic style shooting and Olympic pistols if you want to check those out. In any case, thank you to my channel members for supporting the channel directly. You too can become a channel member by clicking the join button next to the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.